amid the dazzling lights of the St. Mary's Motor Show. A revolutionary car, the Aurora, promises to steal the spotlight, but its creator, Victor Langston, collapses in a shower of sparks, electrocuted before a stunned crowd. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, as she unravels a web of envy, ambition, and betrayal. From a meticulous engineer to a desperate rival, a commanding organizer to a nervous technician, each hides a secret. Can Miss Marple, with her knitting needles and village wisdom, expose the killer who rigged the stage for murder before the truth slips away? Chapter 1. The Gleaming Stage. The grand exhibition hall of the St. Mary's Motor Show shimmered under a constellation of chandeliers, their light dancing across the polished curves of automobiles that lined the vast space like sculptures in a gallery. The air hummed with anticipation, a blend of petrol fumes and the murmur of an eager crowd. Engineers, journalists and enthusiasts, all drawn to the unveiling of the Aurora, a sleek electric marvel touted as the future of motoring. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively in a cushioned chair near the rear of the hall, her knitting needles moving with rhythmic precision, observed the scene with her usual quiet acuity. Her nephew Raymond, ever eager to draw his aunt into the modern world, had insisted she attend, promising a spectacle. "You'll see progress itself, Aunt Jane," he had said, his eyes alight. Miss Marple, though sceptical of such grand claims, had agreed, curious to witness the human passions that such events invariably stirred. The hall was a study in contrasts, the gleaming machinery, cold and precise, set against the warm buzz of human ambition. At the centre of it all stood Victor Langston, the Aurora's designer, a man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his flair for self-promotion. Tall, with a sharp jaw and eyes that seemed to challenge the room, he strode toward the stage, his tailored suit catching the light. The Aurora, draped in a silken sheet, waited beside him, its contours hinting at elegance and power. Miss Marple's gaze, however, lingered not on the car, but on the people around it. A woman with a clipboard, her face taut with focus. A man in a rival booth, his smile tight. A technician adjusting wires with hurried hands. And an organizer, her voice cutting through the din with practiced authority. Each, she noted, moved with purpose, yet beneath their polish lay something less certain. Tension, perhaps, or envy. As Victor raised his hand to signal the unveiling, the crowd hushed. A spotlight flared, bathing the stage in a stark white glow. He grasped the silk cover, his voice booming with confidence as he spoke of innovation and legacy. Then, with a flourish, he pulled the sheet away. The Aurora gleamed, its chrome accents flashing like a beacon. A ripple of applause began, but it was cut short by a sharp crackle, like a whip snapping in the air. Sparks erupted from the stage's wiring, and Victor's body stiffened, his hand still clutching the sheet. He staggered, his face contorted in a fleeting grimace, and collapsed in a heap, the Aurora looming over him like a silent sentinel. Gasps filled the hall, followed by a stunned silence. Miss Marple's needles stilled, her eyes narrowing. A woman screamed. A man shouted for a doctor. But Miss Marple, her mind already sifting through the chaos, knew this was no accident. Death, she thought, had made a calculated entrance. She remained seated as the crowd surged forward, some in panic, others in morbid curiosity. A young policeman pushed through, calling for order, while a grey-haired inspector, Craddock, she recognized with a faint smile, began issuing commands. The stage was cordoned off, and the Aurora, now an unwitting accomplice, was shrouded once more, this time in suspicion. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to St. Mary Mead, where a fallen vicar had once revealed the village's hidden resentments. Here, in this gleaming temple of progress, the same human frailties simmered. Victor Langston, she sensed, had not been universally admired. His death, so public and precise, suggested a hand guided by intent. As Craddock approached, his face grim, Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her bag. "A bad business, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "Very bad indeed," she replied softly, her eyes bright with purpose. The stage was set, and the truth, she knew, would require careful unravelling. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Suspicion. The exhibition hall, so recently a shrine to human ingenuity, had transformed into a sombre arena of suspicion. The chandeliers still cast their crystalline glow, but the light now seemed harsh, picking out the strained faces of the crowd as they milled about, whispering in hushed, uneasy tones. The Aurora, its unveiling cut short by tragedy, stood cordoned behind velvet ropes, a silent monument to Victor Langston's ambition and his demise. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag resting at her feet, sat in a quiet corner of the hall, her eyes moving with the precision of a watchmaker's tool over the scene before her. The chaos of the moment had subsided, replaced by an oppressive air of questions unanswered. Inspector Craddock, his face etched with the weariness of a man too familiar with sudden death, directed his constables with crisp efficiency. Miss Marple, though outwardly serene, felt the familiar stir of curiosity, the same instinct that had unravelled many a tangle in St. Mary Mead. Murder, she was certain, had slipped into this glittering world, and it would not go unnoticed. Craddock approached her, his notebook tucked under one arm, his expression a blend of respect and exasperation. "Miss Marple," he said, inclining his head, "I might have known you'd be here when trouble struck." "Raymond's doing, I presume?" His tone carried a faint warmth, tempered by the gravity of the moment. "Indeed, Inspector," she replied, her voice soft but clear, like a bell rung in a quiet church. "My nephew thought a motor show would broaden my horizons. I dare say he didn't expect this particular excitement." Her eyes, bright and unyielding, met his. "What do we know so far?" Craddock sighed, settling into a chair beside her. "Electrocution, or so it seems. The stage wiring was live, far more than it should have been. Langston touched the display frame, and that was that. The coroner's on his way, but I'd wager it's no accident. Someone tampered with the circuit." He flipped open his notebook, his pen poised. "We've 4 likely suspects, each with access to the stage. Clara Henshaw, the engineer who built the Aurora's electrical systems. Roland Baxter, a rival designer who stood to lose if Langston's car stole the show. Evelyn Street Clare, the organizer who's been running this event like a military campaign. And Tom Ridley, the technician who wired the stage. All were in the vicinity, and all had reason to resent Langston by the sound of it." Miss Marple's needles resumed their gentle rhythm, a counterpoint to the tension in Craddock's voice. "Resentment," she mused, "is a powerful thing. In my village, I once knew a grocer who held a grudge over a misdelivered parcel. It led to quite a scene. Nothing so final as this, of course, but the root is the same. People carry their grievances like kindling, waiting for a spark." She paused, her gaze drifting to the stage. "Tell me about these four, Inspector. What manner of people are they?" Craddock leaned back, his eyes scanning the hall as if the suspects might reveal themselves through sheer force of scrutiny. Clara Henshaw's a sharp one. Mid-30s, methodical, the sort who measures twice and cuts once. She designed the Aurora's electrical core, worked hand in glove with Langston. Word is, he wasn't easy to please. Demanding, dismissive, always pushing for more. If she made a mistake, it'd be her reputation on the line, not his. Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring a picture of Clara. A woman of precision, perhaps prideful, her patience worn thin by a domineering genius. And the rival, this Mr. Baxter. "Roland Baxter," Craddock said, his tone darkening. "A designer in his own right, but his car, the Prometheus they call it, hasn't the Aurora's flash. He's charming enough, all smiles and handshakes, but there's a edge to him. Langston's success would have buried his company. I heard her muttering about unfair advantages earlier today. He was near the stage before the unveiling, though he claims he was mingling with investors." "Envy," Miss Marple said softly, "is a cruel master. I recall a young curate in St. Mary Mead, terribly jealous of another's sermon. It led to no good, though thankfully no bloodshed. Still, ambition can twist a man's heart." Her fingers paused, the give at wool taut between them. "And the organizer? Evelyn Street, Clare," Craddock continued, flipping a page in his notebook. "Formidable woman, late 40s, runs this show like it's her empire. She's poured everything into making it a success. Her name, her money, her future. Langston's death could ruin her. The press are circling already, sniffing scandal. She was backstage, checking the setup, not 10 minutes before it happened. Says she was ensuring everything was perfect, but I wonder if she saw something she shouldn't have." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "A woman with much to lose is a woman to watch. In my experience, those who build empires are loath to see them crumble. And the technician?" "Tom Ridley," Craddock said, his voice tinged with pity. "Young, nervy, a bit out of his depth. He's the one who set up the stage wiring, under Langston's orders. Says he followed instructions to the letter, but he's shaking like a leaf. Could be guilt, could be fear. He was fiddling with the cables right up to the last moment, at Langston's insistence. Something about making the lights more dramatic." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her thoughts drifting to a clumsy handyman in her village whose fumbling had once masked a deeper intent. "A technician's mistake can be convenient cover," she said. "Or a scapegoat's burden. Have you examined the wiring itself?" Craddock nodded. "The lads are at it now. Preliminary look suggests the circuit was overloaded deliberately. A wire crossed where it shouldn't be, feeding too much current to the display frame. Whoever did it knew enough to make it look accidental, but not enough to fool a proper inspection. Or perhaps they meant to be found out. Or they meant to kill," Miss Marple said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. She set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "This was no prank gone wrong, Inspector. The stage, the timing, the crowd. It was all too perfect. Someone wanted Victor Langston dead, and they wanted the world to see it." Craddock rubbed his jaw, his eyes searching hers. "You've a knack for cutting to the bone, Miss Marple. Any early thoughts?" She tilted her head, her expression mild, but her mind racing. only that people are rarely what they seem. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a postmistress who seemed the soul of kindness, yet she harboured secrets that shocked us all. These four, Clara, Roland, Evelyn, Tom, they each wear a mask, I suspect. The trick is to see what lies beneath. Craddock rose, tucking his notebook away. I'll have them brought to the organiser's office for questioning. Care to join me? Your perspective might be useful. Miss Marple smiled, a gentle curve that belied the steel in her gaze. I'll bring my knitting, Inspector. It helps me think. The organiser's office, tucked behind the exhibition hall, was a stark contrast to the grandeur outside. Its walls were lined with schedules and blueprints, a testament to Evelyn Street. Claire's meticulous control, a mahogany desk dominated the room, cluttered with papers and a half-empty teacup, its saucer stained with a faint ring. Miss Marple settled into a corner chair, her knitting resumed, while Craddock stood by the desk, his presence authoritative but not overbearing. The suspects were summoned one by one, each entering with a mix of wariness and defiance. Clara Henshaw arrived first, her posture rigid, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her engineer's hands, steady and calloused, clasped a leather notebook as if it were a shield. I don't know what you expect me to say, she began, her voice clipped. I designed the Aurora's systems to be foolproof. If there was a fault, it wasn't mine. Her eyes flicked to Miss Marple, lingering briefly on the older woman's serene expression, before returning to Craddock. Victor was challenging, but I'd never jeopardize my work, or his life. Craddock's pen scratched across his notebook. You were seen arguing with Langston yesterday, Miss Henshaw. Care to explain? Clara's jaw tightened. He wanted last-minute changes, risky ones. I told him the system couldn't handle them without retesting. He didn't listen. He never did. Her tone held a trace of bitterness, quickly masked. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind noting the engineer's pride, her suppressed anger. A woman scorned, even professionally, could be dangerous. Roland Baxter entered next, his charm as polished as the cars outside. His suit was impeccable, his smile practiced, but his eyes darted about the room as if seeking an escape. Dreadful business, he said, shaking his head. Victor was a genius, no question. A shame it ended this way. His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the faint tremor in his hands as he adjusted his cufflinks. Craddock pressed him on his whereabouts, and Roland's answer was vague. I was with investors, charming the money out of them. You know how it is. Miss Marple thought of a village charmer, whose easy lies had unravelled under scrutiny. Roland's alibi, she suspected, would not hold. Evelyn Street Clare swept in like a general, her tailored dress and commanding presence filling the room. This is a disaster, she declared, her voice low but fierce. My show, my reputation, ruined unless we get to the bottom of this. She stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the glass. Craddock asked about her movements, and she was precise. I was backstage, ensuring the lighting was perfect. I saw nothing unusual. Yet her fingers twisted a gold bracelet, a nervous tick that Miss Marple noted with interest. Ambition, she knew, could drive a woman to desperate measures. Tom Ridley was the last, his overalls smudged with grease, his face pale and drawn. He fidgeted, his eyes avoiding Craddock's. I did what Mr. Langston told me, he stammered. He wanted the lights brighter, said it'd make the Aurora stand out. I adjusted the wiring, but I swear it was safe." His voice cracked, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy, tempered by caution. Fear could mask guilt as easily as innocence. As the interviews concluded, Craddock dismissed the suspects, his expression unreadable. He turned to Miss Marple, who was winding her wool with deliberate care. "Well," he asked, "any insights?" She looked up, her eyes clear and piercing. "They all have reasons to dislike Mr. Langston, don't they? Clara's pride, Roland's envy, Evelyn's ambition, Tom's fear. But dislike is not enough. We must look for the one who acted, the one who saw opportunity in that stage's wiring. In my village, a baker once tampered with a rival's oven, not to kill, but to ruin. The intent was small, but the result was catastrophic. I wonder, Inspector, if we have something similar here." Craddock nodded, his respect for her growing. "We'll dig deeper. The wiring, the blueprints, the alibis, something will break." Miss Marple rose, her knitting bag in hand. "It always does, Inspector. People cannot help but betray themselves in the end." As they left the office, the hall beyond was quieter now. The crowd dispersed, the aurora standing alone under its shroud. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the suspects, each a thread in a tangled skein. She would watch and listen and wait. The truth, she knew, was like her knitting, a matter of patience and the right pattern. Chapter 3. The Engineer's Precision. The morning after Victor Langston's shocking demise, the St. Mary's Motor Show carried on with a subdued air, as if the gleaming automobiles themselves mourned their fallen creator. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, made her way through the exhibition hall, her steps unhurried but purposeful. The crowd was thinner now, their excitement tempered by whispers of tragedy. She had declined Inspector Craddock's offer to join him at the police station, preferring instead to visit the heart of the Aurora's creation, the workshop where Clara Henshaw, the engineer, had toiled alongside Victor. Miss Marple knew that machines, like people, held secrets in their workings, and she intended to uncover them. The workshop, tucked behind a discreet partition at the hall's edge, was a stark contrast to the polished spectacle outside. Its air was thick with the scent of oil and metal, and tools lay scattered across workbenches like soldiers at rest. Clara Henshaw stood at the centre, her sleeves rolled up, her dark hair escaping its bun in wisps that framed a face drawn with fatigue. She was examining a circuit board, her movements precise, almost reverent, as if the components could absolve her of suspicion. Miss Marple paused at the threshold, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side, and observed the younger woman's focus. It reminded her of Mrs. Eldridge, the seamstress in St. Mary Mead, whose meticulous stitches had once concealed a theft. Precision, Miss Marple knew, could be both a virtue and a mask. "Good morning, Miss Henshaw," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of intent. Clara started, her hand jerking slightly, and a screwdriver clattered to the floor. She recovered quickly, her expression wary but polite. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" Clara said, wiping her hands on the rag. "The inspector's friend. I didn't expect visitors." Her tone was guarded, her eyes flicking to the doorway as if expecting Craddock to follow. "I hope I'm not intruding," Miss Marple replied, stepping forward with a smile that invited trust. "I find these modern machines fascinating, though I confess I understand little of their workings. You, I'm told, are the genius behind the Aurora's heart. Clara's lips twitched, a flicker of pride breaking through her reserve. "Hardly a genius," she said, setting the circuit board down. "I just do my job. Victor had the vision. I made it real." Her voice caught on his name, and Miss Marple noted the shadow that crossed her face. Grief, perhaps, or something sharper. "It must have been a great responsibility," Miss Marple said, settling onto a stool near the workbench, her knitting needles emerging almost by instinct. "Working so closely with a man like Mr. Langston. I imagine he was exacting." Clara's jaw tightened, and she busied herself with a stack of schematics. "He was brilliant," she said after a pause, "but he didn't suffer fools. Or delays. He pushed everyone. Me, the team, even himself, sometimes too far." Her fingers lingered on a blueprint, tracing a line with unconscious care. Miss Marple's eyes followed the motion, noting the engineer's steady hands, the kind that could wire a circuit or perhaps unwire it. "I've known men like that," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. "In my village there was a choir master who demanded perfection. It made him admired, but not always loved. Did you find Mr. Langston difficult?" Clara hesitated, her gaze fixed on the blueprint. "He could be," she admitted. "He'd change his mind mid-design, insist on impossible adjustments. Last week he wanted the Aurora's display to have a dynamic pulse, more voltage for the lights. I told him it was risky without recalibrating the entire system. He wouldn't hear it." Her voice held a trace of frustration, quickly suppressed. "But I checked everything. My work was sound." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy. "Of course, my dear, no one doubts your skill, but such pressure must wear on one. I recall a young gardener in St. Mary Mead pushed to exhaustion by his employer's demands. He made a mistake once, quite a costly one. It wasn't his fault, not really, but the blame fell on him all the same." Clara's eyes met hers, sharp and searching, as if weighing whether the older woman's words held accusation. "I didn't make a mistake," she said firmly. "The Aurora's systems were perfect. If something went wrong, it was someone else's doing." She turned back to her workbench, her movements brisk, but Miss Marple caught the faint tremor in her hands. The workshop was a labyrinth of order, every tool and component in its place a testament to Clara's meticulous nature. Yet Miss Marple's gaze was drawn to a corner where a pile of discarded papers lay, half hidden beneath a coil of wire. One sheet, crumpled but visible, bore a series of hurried annotations, unlike the neat script of Clara's schematics. Miss Marple rose, her movement slow to avoid alarming the engineer, and approached the pile as if admiring the workshop's efficiency. "What a marvel of organization," she said, her fingers brushing the papers as she adjusted her shawl. "Do you keep all your plans so neatly?" Clara glanced over, her expression tightening. "Most of them," she said. "Some get tossed if they're outdated. Victor was always sketching new ideas, leaving them everywhere." She moved to the pile, gathering the papers with a touch of haste. "These are nothing important." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes soft but unyielding. "Oh, I'm sure you know best. I only ask because my nephew Raymond is so careless with his manuscripts. I find them in the oddest places, and they often tell such interesting stories." She let the comment hang, watching as Clara stuffed the papers into a drawer, her movements just a shade too quick. As Miss Marple returned to her stool, Her mind sifted through what she had seen. The blueprint with its unfamiliar handwriting suggested another hand at work, someone who had access to Clara's domain. She thought of Roland Baxter, the rival designer, whose technical knowledge might rival Clara's own. Or perhaps Evelyn Street Clare, whose control over the show's logistics could extend to the workshop. Even Tom Ridley, the nervous technician, might have left a mark in his fumbling haste. The truth, Miss Marple knew, lay in the details, like the stray threads in a poorly knit scarf. Clara, perhaps sensing the scrutiny, changed the subject. "You're not what I expected," she said, her tone lighter but still cautious. "I thought you'd be asking questions like the inspector, not chatting about villagers and gardeners." Miss Marple chuckled, her needles pausing. "Oh, my dear, I find people are much the same, whether in a village or a grand hall like this. Their hopes, their fears, their secrets, they show themselves if you look closely. I'm only an old woman who likes to understand things." Clara's smile was faint, almost reluctant. "You're not as harmless as you seem, are you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I hope I'm harmless enough," she said, "but I do dislike loose ends." She rose, tucking her knitting away. "Thank you for indulging me, Miss Henshaw. I'll let you get back to your work." As she stepped out into the exhibition hall, Miss Marple felt the weight of her observations settling into place. Clara's precision was admirable, but her defensiveness suggested a wound, professional or personal, that bore watching. The blueprint, with its alien script, was a clue, one she would urge Craddock to examine. She thought of a village schoolteacher whose perfect handwriting had once betrayed a forgery. Details, always details, were the key. The hall bustled with activity, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere, weaving a pattern from the threads of suspicion. Clara Henshaw was no fool, but neither was she above suspicion. As Miss Marple made her way toward the exit, her mind turned to the other suspects. Roland, Evelyn, Tom, each a piece in the puzzle of Victor Langston's death. She would visit them in turn, she decided, and let their words, their glances, their hesitations reveal what they wished to hide. The truth, like a well-knit shawl, would come together in time. Chapter 4. The Rivals' Envy, the St. Mary's Motor Show, though subdued by the shadow of Victor Langston's death, pulsed with a defiant energy, as if determined to outshine its tragedy. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl adjusted against the morning chill, navigated the exhibition hall with the quiet determination of a gardener tending a tricky patch. Her visit to Clara Henshaw's workshop had left her with a tantalizing clue: the annotated blueprint, its handwriting foreign to the engineer's precise script. Now her attention turned to Roland Baxter, the rival designer whose own creation, the Prometheus, languished in the Aurora's formidable shadow. Miss Marple had seen envy before, in the pinched smiles of St. Mary Mead's villagers, and she suspected it might burn brightly in Roland's heart. She found him at his booth, a sleek but understated display compared to the Aurora's grandeur. The Prometheus, a car of elegant lines but less audacious innovation, gleamed under carefully positioned lights, its chrome reflecting a sparse crowd. Roland stood beside it, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile a practiced curve that invited admiration. Yet Miss Marple, pausing at the edge of the booth, noted the tension in his posture, the way his fingers adjusted his tie with a touch too much care. He was a man performing, she thought, like Mr. Harroway, the village solicitor, whose charm had once masked a desperate debt. "Good morning, Mr. Baxter," Miss Marple said, approaching with a disarming smile, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. "What a splendid car! Quite a work of art, though I'm no expert in these modern marvels." Roland's eyes lit up, his salesman's instinct seizing the opportunity. "Miss Marple, isn't it? A pleasure," he said, extending a hand with a flourish. "The Prometheus may not have the Aurora's flash, but it's built for reliability, for the everyday man. Would you care to hear about its features?" His voice was warm, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of strain in his eyes, as if he were measuring her interest against his own precarious fortunes. "Oh, I'd love to hear," she replied, settling onto a cushioned bench near the booth, her needles emerging with their familiar rhythm. "But I confess, I'm more curious about the man behind the machine. It must be quite a challenge, competing in such a grand arena." Roland's smile tightened, just for a moment, before he leaned against the Prometheus, his posture casual, but his eyes watchful. "It's a tough game," he admitted. "Victor Langston set a high bar. The Aurora's got everyone talking. Had everyone talking, I should say." He paused, his gaze drifting to the cordoned-off stage where Victor had fallen. "A terrible loss. He was a visionary, even if he played a bit fast and loose." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a steady counterpoint to the hum of the hall. "I've heard he was a forceful character," she said, her tone gentle but probing. "In my village, we had a painter once, terribly talented but dreadfully proud. He made enemies without meaning to. Did you find Mr. Langston difficult?" Roland chuckled, a sound that carried more edge than mirth. "Difficult? That's putting it mildly. Victor had a way of making you feel small, like your work was a footnote to his genius. He'd swoop in, charm the investors, steal the spotlight. My Prometheus is solid, but it can't compete with his theatrics." His fingers drummed on the car's hood, a restless rhythm. "Still, I didn't wish him ill. Not like that." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "Of course not. But it must be hard, seeing your efforts overshadowed. I recall a young baker in St. Mary Mead, whose bread was fine, but never matched the fame of a rival's. He grew bitter, poor man, and it led to such a fuss." She let the story hang, watching Roland's face for a reaction. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if sensing a trap, but he recovered quickly. "I won't deny it stung," he said, his voice smooth again. "But I'm a professional. I was out there, working the crowd, shaking hands. Couldn't have been near the stage when it happened." He gestured vaguely towards the hall, his alibi as polished as his suit but just as thin. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze soft but unyielding. "How fortunate to be so engaged. I suppose you were far too busy to notice anything amiss near the Aurora's display. Such a complex setup, all those wires and lights." Roland's smile faltered, a crack in his facade. "Wires aren't my game," he said quickly. "I leave that to the technicians. I was with a group of investors, Mr. Hargrove, Mrs. Ellison, a few others. They'll vouch for me." His tone was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way his hand lingered on the car, as if anchoring himself. She shifted her knitting, her fingers deft despite the weight of her thoughts. Roland's technical knowledge, she knew, was no less than Victor's. He had designed the Prometheus after all. and such a man would understand circuits and their dangers. She thought of the blueprint in Clara's workshop, its hurried annotations suggesting a hand less meticulous than the engineer's. Could Roland have slipped into the workshop unseen to tamper with the Aurora's display? His booth was close enough, and the late hours before the show offered ample opportunity. "I do admire your resilience," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "It takes a strong man to keep smiling under pressure. I suppose you and Mr. Langston crossed paths often, being rivals, perhaps in the workshops, discussing designs." Roland's eyes flicked to hers, a spark of unease quickly masked. "Not often," he said. "Victor kept his team close, didn't share much. I stuck to my own work." He straightened, glancing at a passing journalist, as if eager for an escape. "If you'll excuse me, Miss Marple, I should attend to my guests." "Of course," she said, rising with a gracious nod. "Thank you for indulging an old woman's curiosity. I shall keep an eye out for your Prometheus. It deserves its moment, I'm sure." As Roland turned away, his smile returning like a curtain drawn across a stage, Miss Marple's mind was already at work. His charm was a shield, but it had slipped, revealing a man whose envy might have festered into something darker. She recalled a village grocer whose jealousy of a neighbour's success had led to a petty theft that spiralled into ruin. Roland's stakes were higher, his company teetering on the edge of collapse if the Aurora dominated. Had he seen a chance to dim Victor's light for good? She made her way to a nearby café, its tables spilling onto the exhibition hall's concourse, and ordered a pot of tea. Settling by a window, she watched the crowd while her thoughts sifted through Roland's words. His alibi, dependent on investors, would need checking. Craddock could handle that. But more telling was his unease when she mentioned the wires. A man so quick to distance himself from technical details might know more than he let on. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a group of technicians near the Aurora's stage, their heads bent over a tangle of cables. One of them, she noted, was Tom Ridley, his nervous movements unmistakable. She would speak to him soon, she decided, but first she would ask Craddock to confirm Roland's whereabouts. A security guard perhaps had seen him near the workshop. A stray glance could unravel his story. And that blueprint, with its incriminating scrawl, needed closer scrutiny. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Spinster, whose careless note had betrayed a secret affair. Handwriting, Miss Marple knew, could be as revealing as a confession. The cafe's warmth was a comfort, but Miss Marple's mind was sharp, cutting through the fog of Roland's charm. Envy, she mused, was a poison that seeped slowly, and Roland Baxter had drunk deeply. Whether it had driven him to murder remained to be seen, but she would watch him, as she watched all those whose smiles hid shadows. Her tea grew cold, but her resolve did not. The truth, like the Prometheus itself, awaited its moment to shine. Chapter 5. The Organizer's Ambition. The St. Mary's Motor Show pressed on, its glamour dimmed but not extinguished by the tragedy of Victor Langston's death. The exhibition hall, with its gleaming cars and murmuring crowds, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next act in a drama yet to unfold. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly pinned and her knitting bag at her side, moved through the throng with the quiet purpose of a villager on her way to church. Her encounters with Clara Henshaw and Roland Baxter had sharpened her sense of the currents beneath the show's polished surface. Pride, envy, and now, she suspected, ambition. Today, her focus turned to Evelyn Street. Claire, the indomitable organizer, whose iron will had shaped this event into a triumph, only to see it teeter on the edge of scandal. Miss Marple knew ambition could be a fire that warmed or consumed, and she meant to discover which it was for Evelyn. She found the press room, a hive of activity tucked behind the main hall, where Evelyn held court amid a flurry of reporters and flashing cameras. The organizer stood at a podium, her tailored navy dress as crisp as her voice, deflecting questions with the skill of a fencer parrying thrusts. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her eyes, sharp and green, scanned the room with a commander's vigilance. Miss Marple slipped in quietly, taking a seat at the back, her knitting needles emerging like old friends. She observed Evelyn's performance, noting the controlled grace, the faint tightness at the corners of her mouth. It reminded her of Mrs. Carver, the St. Mary Mead Parish Council chair, whose ambition for a perfect fate had once led to a most unfortunate incident with a rigged raffle. Evelyn's voice cut through the clamour. The St. Mary's Motor Show remains committed to showcasing innovation, she declared, her tone firm despite a reporter's probing question about Victor's death. We are cooperating fully with the police, and I assure you, this tragedy will not define us. The words were resolute, but Miss Marple caught the fleeting glance Evelyn cast toward the door, as if expecting an interruption, or dreading one. When the press conference ended, the reporters dispersed, and Miss Marple approached, her smile as disarming as a village vicar's. "Miss St. Clair," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "Might I have a moment? I'm Jane Marple, a guest of my nephew Raymond. I've been so impressed by your management of this splendid event." Evelyn's expression softened, though her eyes remained wary. "Miss Marple," she said, stepping down from the podium, "you're kind to say so, under the circumstances. It's been a trying time." She gestured to a nearby table, where a tray of tea and biscuits sat untouched. "Please, join me. I could use a moment's respite." They settled at the table, and Miss Marple poured the tea, her movements deliberate, her eyes noting the slight tremor in Evelyn's hand as she accepted a cup. "It must be a tremendous responsibility," Miss Marple said, "organizing such a grand affair. I've seen village fêtes planned with less care than you've put into this show. But success, I find, often comes with its own pressures." Evelyn's lips curved into a wry smile. "You're not wrong," she said, sipping her tea. "This show is my legacy. Years of work, countless favors called in, investors persuaded. It's all to prove what I can do. Victor's death." She paused, her fingers tightening around the cup. "It's a disaster. The press is circling like vultures, and my backers are nervous. If this falls apart, so does everything I've built." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing rhythm in the tense air. "A great deal at stake," she murmured. "I recall a lady in my village, a schoolmistress, who poured her heart into a charity bazaar. When it went awry, she was beside herself. She'd have done anything to save it, I think." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, watching Evelyn's reaction. The organizer's gaze flickered, a shadow crossing her face. "I'd do a lot to protect this show," she admitted, "but not what you're implying." She set her cup down with a clink. "I was backstage before the unveiling, checking the setup. Everything was in order. I saw Victor, alive and insufferable as ever, barking orders at poor Tom Ridley. I left them to it. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle curiosity. You must have an eye for detail, managing such a complex event. Did you notice anything unusual? A stranger near the stage, perhaps, or something out of place? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers brushing the gold bracelet on her wrist. A nervous habit, Miss Marple noted, like Mrs. Carver's habit of twisting her brooch when flustered. Nothing specific, Evelyn said. It was chaos, as always before a big reveal. Technicians, assistants, all rushing about. I was focused on the schedule, making sure the lights and sound were timed perfectly. Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple sensed a careful choice of words, as if Evelyn were navigating a minefield. I'm sure you were indispensable, Miss Marple said, her tone warm. A woman in your position must know every corner of this hall. The workshops, the stage, the wiring, nothing escapes you, I imagine. Evelyn's smile was tight. I try to stay on top of things, but the technical side, that's Clara's domain, or Tom's. I leave the wires to them. She glanced at her watch, a subtle signal of dismissal. I should get back. The press won't wait, and neither will my investors. Of course, Miss Marple said, rising with a gracious nod. Thank you for indulging an old woman's chatter. I do hope this terrible business resolves quickly, for your sake and the show's. As Evelyn hurried back to the press room, Miss Marple lingered, her thoughts as intricate as the lace emerging from her needles. Evelyn's ambition was palpable, a force that drove her to command every detail of the show. But such control, Miss Marple knew, could breed desperation. Had Evelyn seen a threat in Victor's flamboyance, his potential to overshadow her carefully crafted event? A scandal could ruin her, and a man like Victor, with his knack for drawing attention, might have been a risk too great to bear. She recalled a St. Mary Mead widow, Mrs. Langley, whose ambition to lead the Women's Institute had led to a subtle sabotage of a rival's speech. It was petty, not murderous, but the impulse was the same: to protect one's empire at all costs. Evelyn's presence backstage, her access to the stage's setup, placed her dangerously close to opportunity. And that bracelet, twisted in moments of stress, suggested a woman less composed than she appeared. Miss Marple made her way to a quiet alcove, where she could observe the hall without drawing attention. The Aurora's stage, still cordoned, was a magnet for curious glances. And she noted a figure lingering nearby, Tom Ridley, his hands fidgeting as he spoke to a constable. His nervousness was a thread she would follow, but first she would speak to Craddock. Evelyn's schedule, so meticulously kept, might reveal more than her words. Had she truly been backstage only to check the lights, or had she seen or done something more? As she sipped a fresh cup of tea, brought by a harried assistant, Miss Marple's mind wove the threads of the case. Clara's precision, Roland's envy, and now Evelyn's ambition, each a motive, each a mask. The blueprint in the workshop, with its telltale handwriting, remained a key, and she would urge Craddock to secure it before it vanished. She thought of a village fete, where a misplaced program had revealed a theft. Details, always details, with a warp and weft of truth. The hall buzzed around her, but Miss Marple's focus was unwavering. Evelyn Street Clare, with her empire at stake, was a woman to watch. Whether her ambition had driven her to murder, or merely to silence, remained to be seen. Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, and with each stitch she felt the pattern of the crime taking shape. Chapter 6. The Technician's Oversight. The St. Mary's Motor Show, though still a spectacle of polished chrome and humming engines, carried a weight of unease, as if the very air had absorbed the shock of Victor Langston's death. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped with the quiet elegance of a village spinster, moved through the exhibition hall with a measured step, her knitting bag a constant companion. Her conversations with Clara Henshaw, Roland Baxter and Evelyn St. Clair had painted a vivid picture of ambition and resentment, each suspect a thread in a tapestry yet to be fully woven. Now her attention turned to Tom Ridley, the young technician whose nervous hands had wired the stage for the Aurora's fateful unveiling. Miss Marple knew that fear, like a loose stitch, could unravel under scrutiny, and she meant to test its strength. The maintenance room, a cramped space tucked behind the main stage, was a world apart from the hall's grandeur. Its walls were lined with coils of cable, battered toolboxes, and a single flickering bulb that cast harsh shadows. Tom Ridley stood at a workbench, his overalls smudged with grease, his fingers fumbling with a tangle of wires as if seeking solace in their familiarity. His face, pale and boyish, bore the strain of sleepless nights, and his eyes darted toward the door as Miss Marple entered, accompanied by Inspector Craddock, who had agreed to her request for a quiet word with the technician. Tom's resemblance to young Tommy Pierce, a St. Mary Mead lad whose clumsiness had once masked a theft, was striking, and Miss Marple's instincts stirred. "Good morning, Mr. Ridley," she said, her voice soft as a summer breeze, though her eyes were sharp with purpose. "I hope we're not interrupting. I'm Miss Marple, a friend of the inspector's, and quite curious about your work. All these wires and gadgets, it's a marvel to someone like me." Tom's hands stilled, and he wiped them on his overalls, leaving a fresh smear of grease. "Not much to it, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just doing my job. Didn't expect all this." His gaze flicked to Craddock, then back to the workbench, avoiding Miss Marple's steady look. Craddock, leaning against the doorframe, kept his tone brisk but not unkind. "We need to go over your statement again, Ridley. You were the last to touch the stage wiring, correct? Under Langston's orders?" Tom nodded, his shoulders hunching. "Yes, sir. Mr. Langston wanted the lights brighter, said it'd make the Aurora pop. I adjusted the circuit, added a bit more juice, like he asked. I checked it twice. It was safe, I swear." His voice cracked, and he rubbed his eyes, leaving a smudge on his cheek. Miss Marple noted the tremble in his hands, the kind she'd seen in a village boy caught pilfering apples, torn between guilt and fear. "It must have been quite a pressure," she said gently, settling onto a stool, her knitting needles emerging with their familiar rhythm. "Taking orders from a man like Mr. Langston, so particular and grand. I knew a carpenter once, in my village, who worked for a demanding squire. Poor lad was always in a state, worried he'd miss a detail." Tom's eyes met hers, wary but drawn by her kindness. "Mr. Langston wasn't easy," he admitted, "always pushing, always wanting more. Said my work was adequate, but he'd check it himself, like I couldn't be trusted." His voice held a trace of resentment, quickly swallowed. "I did everything right, though. I'm not some amateur." "Of course not," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. "You strike me as a careful young man, but with so much hustle and bustle before the show, it must have been hard to keep track of everything. Did anyone else come near the wiring, perhaps? A stranger, or even someone familiar?" Tom's fingers tightened around a pair of pliers, and he shook his head. "It was just me and Mr. Langston mostly. Miss St. Clair was backstage, checking things, and Miss Henshaw came by once to look at the display panel, but no one touched my work." He hesitated, his eyes darting to a corner of the room where a wire cutter lay, its handle worn and distinct. Miss Marple followed his glance, her mind noting the tool's prominence like a misplaced hymn book in a church pew. Craddock stepped forward, his notebook open. "You said Langston insisted on the adjustment at the last minute. Did he give you specific instructions, or was it more general?" Tom's brow furrowed, and he rubbed the back of his neck. "He was specific. Told me exactly which circuit to boost, how much voltage. Said he'd done the math himself. I followed his orders, but I checked the connections after. Nothing was crossed, nothing wrong." His voice rose, a touch defensive, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the blueprint she'd seen in Clara's workshop, its annotations suggesting a hand other than the engineer's. Could Tom's adjustments made under pressure have been guided by a tampered plan? "I'm sure you were thorough," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing, "but it's easy to miss something when time is short. In my village, a young postman once delivered a letter to the wrong house because he was rushed. It caused quite a stir, though nothing so grave as this." She paused, letting the story settle. "Did Mr. Langston leave you any notes, perhaps? A diagram or such?" Tom shook his head, but his eyes flicked to the wire cutter again, a movement so slight Miss Marple might have missed it had she not been watching. "No notes," he said. "Just told me what to do. I didn't need a diagram. I know my job." His voice was firm, but the flush creeping up his neck betrayed his unease. Craddock, sensing the shift, pressed gently. "You were seen arguing with Langston earlier that day, Ridley? About what?" Tom's face reddened, and he gripped the workbench. "It wasn't an argument, not really. He was on about my hours. Said I wasn't pulling my weight. I told him I hadn't been paid for the overtime he kept demanding. Got a bit heated, but that's all." He looked down, his shoulders sagging. "I didn't want him dead. I just wanted my due." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind weaving connections. Tom's resentment, though small, was real, a spark that could ignite under the right conditions. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, whose grudge over unpaid wages had led to a sabotaged flower bed. Tom's access to the wiring, his last-minute adjustments, made him a convenient scapegoat, or a perfect culprit. That wire cutter, left so carelessly, intrigued her. Had it been used to alter the circuit, perhaps by another's hand? She rose, her movements slow to keep Tom at ease. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Ridley," she said, her smile warm. "It's clear you take pride in your work, and that's a fine thing. I'm sure the inspector will sort this out." She glanced at Craddock, her eyes conveying a silent request to note the wire cutter. As they left the maintenance room, Craddock's expression was grim. "He's scared," he said once they were out of earshot. "But is it guilt, or just the fear of being blamed?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Fear can hide many things, Inspector. Like a boy in my village caught with a broken window. He swore it was an accident, but the truth was more deliberate. I wonder if Tom's adjustments were as innocent as he claims. That wire cutter, for instance. It seems out of place." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "I'll have it examined, and I'll check Langston's instructions, see if there's a record of what he told Ridley. If someone fed him bad directions—" "Exactly," Miss Marple said, her eyes bright. "A small push can lead to a great fall. We must look at who might have guided Tom's hand, knowingly or not." She thought of the blueprint, the workshop's proximity to Roland's booth, Evelyn's backstage presence. Each suspect was a knot in the thread, and Tom's fear was another. As they stepped back into the hall, the Aurora's stage loomed, its cords and cables a silent accusation. Miss Marple's mind turned to the next step, urging Craddock to secure the blueprint and trace the wire cutter's use. Tom Ridley, with his trembling hands and halting words, was a piece of the puzzle, but whether he was pawn or player remained to be seen. Her knitting needles, tucked away, seemed to hum with the promise of answers, and Miss Marple, ever patient, knew the truth would unravel in time. Chapter 7. Whispers of Motive. The St. Mary's Motor Show, now in its third day, seemed to wear its tragedy like a heavy cloak. The gleam of its automobiles dulled by the persistent murmur of Victor Langston's death. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly draped and her knitting bag a constant shadow, had returned to her modest hotel near the exhibition hall, seeking the quiet of her room to untangle the threads of suspicion she had gathered. Her encounters with Clara Henshaw, Roland, Baxter, Evelyn Streetclare, and Tom Ridley had painted a vivid tableau of human frailties, pride, envy, ambition, and fear, each a potential spark for murder. Yet motives, Miss Marple knew, were like the whispers of St. Mary Mead's villagers, elusive, fragmented, and requiring careful listening to discern their truth. Tonight, she would piece together these whispers, letting the patterns of human nature guide her. The hotel's lounge, with its faded chintz armchairs and a crackling fire, offered a comforting contrast to the cold precision of the motor show. Miss Marple settled by a window overlooking the bustling street, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the clatter of teacups and the low hum of conversation from other guests. Her notebook, a small leather-bound volume she kept for such occasions, lay open on the table, its pages filled with neat observations scribbled in her delicate hand. She sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the notes, but her mind was elsewhere. Sifting through the voices she had heard and the glances she had caught. Clara Henshaw's precise manner and veiled resentment lingered in Miss Marple's thoughts. The engineer's pride in her work was evident, but so was her frustration with Victor's relentless demands. Miss Marple recalled a snippet of conversation overheard in the exhibition hall, where a junior technician had mentioned Clara's late-night arguments with Victor over the Aurora's design. "She said he'd ruin her reputation," the technician had whispered to a colleague, unaware of Miss Marple's attentive presence nearby. Could such resentment, festering under pressure, have driven Clara to sabotage the display, knowing the blame might fall elsewhere? Miss Marple thought of Mrs. Eldridge in St. Mary Mead, whose meticulous sewing had hidden a theft born of wounded pride. Clara's blueprint, with its mysterious annotations, remained a key, and Miss Marple made a mental note to press Craddock to secure it. Roland Baxter's polished charm, too, had left an impression, though not a flattering one. His envy of Victor was palpable, his smile a mask for a man whose company teetered on the brink of ruin. Miss Marple had overheard a journalist at the cafe mention Roland's failing finances, a rumour confirmed by a glance at a discarded newspaper that detailed the Prometheus's lukewarm reception. "Baxter's all talk," the journalist had said, "but his investors are pulling out." Envy, Miss Marple knew, could curdle into desperation, as it had with Mr. Harroway. The St. Mary Mead solicitor, whose jealousy of a rival's success had led to a reckless scheme. Roland's vague alibi, mingling with investors, felt flimsy, and his unease when questioned about the stage's wiring suggested knowledge he wished to conceal. Had he slipped into Clara's workshop, altering the blueprint to ensure the Aurora's failure and Victor's demise? Evelyn Street, Claire's ambition was another thread, woven tightly into the fabric of the show. Her fierce control, her nervous twisting of her bracelet, spoke of a woman who would guard her empire at any cost. Miss Marple had caught a whispered exchange between two of Evelyn's assistants in the press room. She was livid when Victor demanded more stage time, one had said he'd make the show all about him. Evelyn's financial backers, Miss Marple learned from a chance remark by a reporter, were restless, threatening to withdraw if the show faltered. A scandal could ruin her, and Victor's flamboyance, his ability to steal the spotlight, might have been a threat too great to tolerate. Miss Marple thought of Mrs. Langley, the St. Mary Mead widow whose ambition for the Women's Institute had led to a subtle sabotage. Had Evelyn, with her backstage access, seen an opportunity to silence Victor and protect her legacy? Tom Ridley's nervous demeanour rounded out the quartet, his fear as telling as the others' motives. His argument with Victor over unpaid overtime, overheard by a security guard near the maintenance room, suggested a grievance that, though small, could have festered. He was shouting about his wages, the guard had told a colleague, unaware of Miss Marple's quiet presence nearby. Tom's claim that he followed Victor's precise instructions intrigued her. Had those instructions been tampered with, perhaps by a hand that knew Tom's inexperience would make him a perfect scapegoat? The wire cutter in the maintenance room, its handle worn and distinct, lingered in her mind, like a misplaced tool in a St. Mary Mead garden shed that had once pointed to a theft. Tom's fear could be innocence, but it could also be guilt, and Miss Marple resolved to watch him closely. She set her knitting aside, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook as she considered the broader picture. The stage's wiring, deliberately overloaded, required knowledge and opportunity, qualities each suspect possessed in varying degrees. Clara's technical expertise made her a candidate, but her pride in the Aurora argued against sabotage. Roland's rivalry and technical skill were compelling, especially given his booth's proximity to the workshop. Evelyn's control over the show's logistics gave her access, but her motive seemed less personal than strategic. Tom, the weakest link, might have been manipulated, his adjustments guided by a false directive. The blueprint, with its unfamiliar handwriting, was the linchpin, and Miss Marple felt certain it held the key to the killer's identity. Her thoughts drifted to a village scandal years ago, when a seemingly trivial dispute over a church flower arrangement had revealed a deeper betrayal. "It's the little things," she murmured, her voice lost in the lounge's hum, "that show the heart's intent." She recalled the suspects' faces. Clara's guarded precision, Roland's strained charm, Evelyn's controlled intensity, Tom's trembling fear. Each had a reason to resent Victor, but resentment alone did not make a murderer. The act required a cold calculation, a willingness to risk all for gain. Miss Marple sipped her tea, now lukewarm, and turned a page in her notebook, jotting a new thought. Who stood to gain most from Victor's death? Clara might reclaim her professional pride, free from his shadow. Roland could save his company, with the Aurora's triumph halted. Evelyn might protect her show, redirecting attention to her own achievements. Tom, perhaps, sought only to escape blame, though his motive seemed the weakest. Yet gain, Miss Marple knew, was not always measured in money or status. Sometimes it was the removal of a thorn, a personal slight avenged. She closed her notebook, her mind alight with possibilities. The exhibition hall, with its tangle of motives and opportunities, was a larger stage than Saint. Mary Mead, but the players were the same, human, flawed, driven by passions they could not always hide. She would return to the hall tomorrow, she decided, and speak to Craddock about the blueprint and the wire cutter. A quiet word with a security guard might confirm Roland's movements, or Evelyn's near the workshop. Tom's instructions too needed tracing. Had Victor truly given them, or had someone else planted the seed? As the fire crackled and the lounge grew quieter, Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, each stitch a step toward clarity. The whispers of motive, gathered from overheard words and fleeting glances, were forming a pattern, like the lace she knitted with such care. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Vicar, whose gentle sermons had hidden a fierce protectiveness for his flock. People, she knew, revealed themselves in their contradictions, and the killer, whoever they were, would be no different. With a final sip of tea, she tucked her knitting away, her resolve as steady as the fire's glow. The truth was close, and she would find it, one whisper at a time. Chapter 8. The Blueprint's Secret. The St. Mary's Motor Show, now shadowed by the grim spectacle of Victor Langston's death, carried on with a brittle determination. Its crowds thinner, but no less curious. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly pinned, and her knitting bag at her side, felt the weight of the case pressing upon her as she returned to the exhibition hall. Her quiet hours in the hotel lounge had woven the whispers of motive into a clearer pattern, but the blueprint she had glimpsed in Clara Henshaw's workshop, its hurried annotations so unlike the engineer's meticulous hand, remained a tantalizing clue. It was, she believed, the key to unraveling the truth, and she meant to see it secured before it vanished into the chaos of suspicion. With a word to Inspector Craddock, she had arranged for him to retrieve the document. And now, as they walked toward the workshop, her mind buzzed with the possibilities it might reveal. The workshop was quieter today, its usual clatter muted as technicians worked with subdued focus, aware of the police presence lingering nearby. Clara was absent, called to the station for further questioning, and Miss Marple noted the absence of her commanding presence with a flicker of interest. It gave Craddock's team free rein to search, and Miss Marple, standing unobtrusively by a workbench, watched as a young constable rummaged through the pile of papers where she had seen the blueprint. Her knitting needles, ever present, clicked softly. a rhythm that steadied her thoughts as she observed the scene with the keenness of a St. Mary Mead gossip passing village secrets. "Here it is, sir," the constable said, holding up a crumpled sheet marked with bold, uneven scrawl. Craddock took it, his brow furrowing as he studied the annotations. Lines and numbers that altered the Aurora's display circuit, directing a surge of voltage to the frame Victor had touched. Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, noting the handwriting's jagged urgency, so different from Clara's precise script. It was, she thought, like the scrawled note of a saint. Mary Mead shopkeeper, whose hasty forgery had once betrayed a petty theft. "This isn't Miss Henshaw's work," Craddock said, his voice low but certain. "She's too careful for this mess, but someone knew enough to make it dangerous." He handed the blueprint to a forensic technician, who promised a swift analysis. "We'll check for prints, see if we can match the handwriting." Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. "It's a deliberate act, Inspector," she said softly. "Not a mistake, but a design. I recall a village schoolmistress who altered a ledger to hide her pilfering. The writing gave her away. It always does." She glanced at the blueprint, now sealed in an evidence bag. Whoever made those changes wanted the Aurora to fail, and Victor with it. Craddock's eyes met hers, a flicker of respect in their depths. "You're thinking of our suspects, aren't you? Baxter's got the technical know-how, and his booth's close enough to slip in here unnoticed. St. Clair was backstage, always poking about. Even Ridley could have done it, though he's green enough to need guidance." "Guidance?" Miss Marple murmured, her mind turning to Tom Ridley's nervous insistence that he followed Victor's orders. Had those orders come from Victor at all, or from Salter? She thought of Roland Baxter, whose envy and technical skill made him a prime candidate for tampering with the circuit. His booth, a mere stone's throw from the workshop, offered opportunity, and his faltering alibi, mingling with investors, had yet to be confirmed. Evelyn Street Clare's ambition and backstage access were equally compelling, though her motive seemed more about control than personal grudge. Tom, with his trembling hands and unpaid overtime, might have been a pawn, but his wire cutter, left so conspicuously, nagged at her thoughts. As they left the workshop, Craddock dispatched a constable to question the security staff about movements near the workshop the night before the show. Miss Marple, walking beside him, her steps slow but purposeful, suggested a particular guard, a burly man with a limp stationed near the workshop's entrance. He seemed observant, she said, recalling his sharp glance during her visit to Clara. He might have seen something. Back at the police command post in the exhibition hall, a makeshift office cluttered with files and coffee cups, Craddock received a preliminary report from the forensic team. The blueprint bore smudged fingerprints, too faint for identification, but enough to confirm tampering. The handwriting exploded on the stage. "It's a lethal setup," the expert confirmed, "designed to overload the frame. Whoever did it knew their craft." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet, as Craddock relayed the findings. "It's a calculated act," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Not a prank, but a trap. The question is, who set it?" She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, whose sabotage of a rival's roses had been no accident but a deliberate slight. The blueprint's alterations were no less intentional, and she felt the net tightening around the culprit, Craddock's radio crackled, and the constable's voice came through with news. The security guard had seen Roland Baxter near the workshop late the previous evening, lingering longer than necessary. "Said he was just curious," the constable reported, "but he looked nervous, kept glancing around." Miss Marple's needles stilled, her mind racing. Roland's technical expertise, his proximity, his envy, it all pointed to him, though Evelyn's backstage presence and Tom's adjustments could not be dismissed. She leaned forward, her eyes bright. "The blueprint is our thread, Inspector. If the handwriting matches Mr. Baxter's, or if his alibi crumbles, we'll have our man. But we must be sure. People are so good at hiding their truths." She thought of a village baker whose perfect icing had concealed a stolen recipe. The truth, she knew, lay in the details. And the blueprint was a detail that spoke volumes. Craddock nodded, his expression grim. "We'll bring Baxter in for a handwriting sample and check his investors' statements. If he was in that workshop, we'll find out." He paused, glancing at her. "You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. Care to sit in on the next round of questioning?" She smiled, tucking her knitting away. "I'd be delighted, Inspector. It's only a matter of watching closely, you know. People always leave a trace." As they prepared to summon the suspects, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the blueprint's secret guiding her like a beacon toward the truth. Chapter 9. A Trap in Motion. The St. Mary's Motor Show, though still a glittering showcase of automotive ambition, seemed to hum with an undercurrent of unease, as if the very walls of the exhibition hall whispered of Victor Langston's untimely end. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly adjusted and her knitting bag a steadfast companion, felt the threads of the case tightening, the blueprint's secret pointing ever more sharply toward a calculated act of murder. The hurried annotations, so unlike Clara Henshaw's precise hand, and the security guard's sighting of Roland Baxter near the workshop, had cast a shadow over the rival designer. But Miss Marple knew better than to leap to conclusions. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen hasty judgments unravel, like a poorly knit scarf, and she meant to test the weave of this case with care. To that end, she proposed a subtle trap to Inspector Craddock, one that might coax the truth from the tangle of lies. The idea came to her as she sat in the police command post, a cramped office within the hall, its air thick with the scent of coffee and ink. Craddock, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to resolve cleanly, listened as Miss Marple outlined her plan. "A small gathering, Inspector," she said, her needles clicking softly, "where you might let slip that new evidence has come to light. Perhaps a witness to the workshop's late-night visitor. People reveal themselves when they feel the net closing." Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, held a glint of certainty, recalling a village fete where a whispered rumour had flushed out a thief. Craddock, ever practical but open to her insights, nodded. "We'll summon the suspects to the organizer's office again, under the pretense of clarifying timelines. I'll mention the blueprint and the guard's testimony, vaguely, to keep them guessing. You'll be there, I presume." "Oh, yes," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle but resolute. "I find it remarkable how much people say without speaking. I shall bring my knitting. It does help me concentrate." The organizer's office, with its mahogany desk and walls plastered with schedules, was a fitting stage for the trap. The suspects arrived one by one, their faces a study in varied unease. Clara Henshaw, her posture rigid, her eyes wary. Roland Baxter, his charm strained, his fingers adjusting his cufflinks with nervous precision. Evelyn St. Clair, her commanding presence tempered by a flicker of anxiety. And Tom Ridley, his hands trembling as he clutched a battered cap. Miss Marple settled in a corner chair, her knitting a quiet rhythm in the tense silence, her gaze moving from one face to another, like a gardener inspecting her roses for blight. Craddock stood by the desk, his notebook open, his tone brisk but measured. "Thank you for coming," he began. "We've had a development. A witness who saw someone near the workshop the night before the show, and a blueprint with some interesting modifications. We're close to identifying the hand behind it." He let the words hang, his eyes scanning the room, inviting reaction. Clara's face remained impassive, though her fingers tightened around her leather notebook. "I told you, Inspector," she said, her voice steady. "My designs were flawless. If someone altered that blueprint, it wasn't me." Her gaze flicked to Roland, a flash of suspicion that Miss Marple noted with interest. Roland's smile faltered, his hand pausing mid-cufflink. "A witness?" he said, his voice light but strained. "I was with investors all evening. Hargrove, Ellison, you can ask them. I had no reason to be in the workshop." His eyes darted to Craddock, then to Miss Marple, whose serene expression seemed to unsettle him further. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead's shopkeeper, whose nervous laughter had betrayed a lie about a missing ledger. Evelyn St. Clair's reaction was sharper, her green eyes narrowing. "This is absurd," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "If there's a witness, let them speak. I was backstage, doing my job, not sneaking around workshops. If anyone's to blame, look at the technicians." Her gaze settled on Tom, her bracelet twisting under her fingers, a gesture Miss Marple had come to recognize as a sign of strain. Tom flinched, his cap crumpling in his hands. "I didn't do anything," he blurted, his voice high with panic. "I followed Mr. Langston's orders, like I said. The wiring was fine when I left it. If someone changed something, it wasn't me." His eyes darted to the door, as if he might bolt, and Miss Marple recalled a young St. Mary Mead lad, caught stealing jam, whose fear had been as telling as his guilt. Craddock held up a hand, his expression calm but authoritative. "No one's accusing anyone, yet. We're simply clarifying. The blueprint's handwriting doesn't match Miss Henshaw's, and our witness places someone near the workshop who shouldn't have been there. We'll know more soon." He closed his notebook with a deliberate snap, letting the silence stretch. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes moving from face to face. Clara's stoic calm suggested confidence, perhaps in her innocence, though her glance at Roland hinted at doubt. Roland's unease was palpable, his polished facade cracking under the weight of Craddock's words. Evelyn's indignation felt rehearsed, a shield for her ambition, while Tom's panic could be either guilt or the terror of a pawn caught in a larger game. She thought of a village whist drive, where a player's nervous shuffle of cards had revealed a cheat. The truth, she knew, was in these small tells, and Roland's reaction was the most telling. As the suspects were dismissed, Roland lingered, his smile forced as he addressed Craddock. "You'll check with my investors, I'm sure," he said. "They'll confirm I was nowhere near the workshop." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie. Craddock nodded, his face unreadable. "We will, Mr. Baxter. Thank you for your time." As the room emptied, Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind alight with observations. "He's rattled, Inspector," she said softly. "Mr. Baxter's charm is wearing thin, and that glance he gave me, he knows I'm watching. In my village, a young curate once tried to charm his way out of a scandal. It didn't work then, and it won't now." Craddock rubbed his jaw, his eyes narrowing, his alibis shaky. Hargroves already admitted he lost sight of Baxter for a good half-hour that night. And the guard's testimony puts him near the workshop, if the handwriting matches. "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but certain. "But we must be thorough." Evelyn's quickness to blame Tom, Clara's glance at Roland, they're all pieces of the puzzle. And Tom's fear, it may be more than just nerves. She thought of the wire cutter in the maintenance room, its worn handle a silent witness. "Have you had that tool examined yet?" Craddock nodded. "It's with forensics. No prints yet, but they're testing for residue. If it was used to tamper with the wiring, we'll know." Miss Marple rose, her shawl adjusted with care. "A trap in motion, Inspector, reveals more than words. Mr. Baxter's unease is a thread to pull, but we must watch the others too. People, you see, cannot help but betray themselves when the pressure mounts." She smiled, her eyes bright with the thrill of the chase, as she prepared to return to the hall, where the next act of this deadly drama awaited. Chapter 10. The Rival's Confession, the St. Mary's Motor Show, now in its waning days, seemed to carry the weight of its tragedy in every polished surface. The gleam of the automobiles dulled by the persistent shadow of Victor Langston's death. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly pinned, and her knitting bag a quiet sentinel at her side, felt the case drawing toward its climax, like a village drama reaching its final act. The trap set in the organizer's office had revealed Roland Baxter's unease, his polished charm cracking under the pressure of Craddock's vague hints about a witness and the tampered blueprint. The rival designer's nervous glances, his faltering alibi, had sharpened Miss Marple's suspicions, and she knew the time had come to press him further. People, she had learned in St. Mary Mead, often unravelled when confronted with their own inconsistencies, and she meant to test Roland's resolve. She arranged a private meeting in a small anteroom off the exhibition hall, a quiet space used for VIP guests, its walls lined with plush velvet and its tables set with a modest tea service. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles moving with their steady rhythm, her demeanour as unassuming as a village spinster, gossiping over a garden fence. Craddock, respecting her instincts, had agreed to let her take the lead, though he stood nearby, his presence a subtle reminder of authority. Roland Baxter arrived promptly, his suit as impeccable as ever, but his smile was strained, his eyes darting to Miss Marple's serene face as if sensing a hidden trap. "Mr. Baxter," she began, her voice soft and inviting, "how kind of you to spare a moment for an old woman's curiosity. I find this motor show so fascinating, but it's the people behind the machines who truly interest me. Do sit down. Would you like some tea?" Roland hesitated, then settled into a chair, his movements careful, as if balancing on a tightrope. "Thank you, Miss Marple," he said, his tone polished but wary. "I'm not sure what more I can tell you. I've spoken to the inspector, given my statement. It's a terrible business, Victor's death." His fingers adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous tick Miss Marple had come to recognize. She poured the tea, her hands steady, her eyes warm but piercing. "Indeed, a tragedy," she said, passing him a cup. "I've been thinking about you, Mr. Baxter, and your Prometheus. Such a fine car, yet overshadowed by the Aurora. It must be disheartening to pour your heart into something and see another steal the light. In my village, I knew a painter whose work was always eclipsed by rivals. It made him quite bitter, poor man." Roland's smile tightened, and he sipped his tea, his eyes avoiding hers. "It's the nature of the game," he said. "Victor had a knack for spectacle. My Prometheus is solid, but it doesn't dazzle like his did. That's business, not personal." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the edge beneath it, like a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper's forced cheer when debts mounted. She nodded, her needles clicking softly. "Of course, you're a professional. But it's human to feel a pang, isn't it? I couldn't help but notice how close your booth is to Miss Henshaw's workshop. So easy to slip in, perhaps, to see what the competition was up to." She paused, letting the words settle, her eyes gentle but unyielding. "The security guard mentioned seeing you there late the night before the show. Just curious, he said you were." Roland's hand froze mid-sip, the cup trembling slightly. "Curious," he said, his laugh brittle. "I might have passed by checking the layout. It's a big show, lots to see. I wasn't in the workshop, if that's what you're getting at." His eyes flicked to Craddock, who stood silent, his notebook closed, but his presence looming. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of kindly concern. "No one's accusing you, Mr. Baxter, but that blueprint in the workshop. Such an odd thing, those scribbled changes. Not Miss Henshaw's hand, the police say, but someone who knew enough to make the Aurora's display dangerous. It's the sort of thing a designer like you might understand, I think." She set her knitting down, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "I recall a young man in my village, a clever lad, who tampered with a rival's garden to win a prize. He didn't mean harm, not at first, but things went too far." Roland's face paled, his charm crumbling like dry plaster. "I don't know anything about blueprints," he said, his voice rising. "I told you, I was with investors. Hargrove, Ellison. They'll confirm it." But his eyes betrayed him, darting to the door, and Miss Marple saw the same panic she'd seen in a St. Mary Mead curate, caught in a lie about a missing collection plate. Craddock stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "Mr. Hargrove says you were out of sight for nearly an hour that night, Mr. Baxter. And the guard's certain it was you near the workshop. Care to explain?" Roland's hands clenched, his cufflinks glinting as he gripped the table. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, but the bravado was hollow. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft as a whisper in church. "Mr. Baxter," she said, "it must have been so hard, watching Victor take everything, your investors, your spotlight, your future. I can imagine how tempting it would be to dim his star, just a little. A small change to the wiring, perhaps, to make the Aurora falter. Not to kill, surely, but to embarrass. Things do go wrong sometimes, don't they?" Her eyes held his, gentle but relentless, like a grandmother coaxing a confession from a wayward child. Roland's composure shattered, his shoulders sagging as he buried his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for him to die," he blurted, his voice raw. "I just wanted to ruin his moment. The Aurora was going to bury me, my company, my work, everything." I knew enough about circuits to overload the display, make it spark, fail in front of everyone. I slipped into the workshop, changed the blueprint, made it look like Clara's mistake. Victor wasn't supposed to touch the frame. His voice broke, and he looked up, his eyes wild with desperation. It was just business, not murder. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her heart ached for the wreckage of ambition. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Baker, whose sabotage of a rival's oven had led to a fire, unintended but devastating. Intentions, she said softly, can be as dangerous as actions, Mr. Baxter. A small act, meant to harm lightly, can grow into something far worse. Craddock moved forward, his voice steady. Roland Baxter, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. You'll need to come with me. He signalled a constable waiting outside, and Roland rose, his face ashen, his charm reduced to a ghost. As they led him away, Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her mind already turning to the aftermath. Roland's confession had unravelled the case, but questions lingered. Had he acted alone, or had another hand guided his? The blueprints, alterations, the wire-cutter's presence suggested a single mind, but she would urge Craddock to confirm every detail. She thought of a village scandal, where a confessed thief had shielded a partner, and resolved to ensure no such shadow lingered here. The anteroom felt quieter now, the tea cooling in its pot. Miss Marple rose, her shawl adjusted with care, and stepped into the hall, where the Aurora stood silent, its triumph tainted. Roland's envy had cost him everything, just as Victor's pride had cost him his life. The truth, she knew, was a bitter thread, but it had been pulled, and the pattern was clear. Chapter 11. The Final Thread. The St. Mary's Motor Show, now approaching its close, seemed to exhale a collective sigh, its grandeur muted by the resolution of Victor Langston's tragic end. The exhibition hall, still alive with the hum of engines and the murmur of visitors, carried a lighter air, as if the truth, once revealed, had lifted a weight from its polished surfaces. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly draped and her knitting bag a quiet companion, sat in a corner of the hall, her needles moving with their familiar rhythm as she reflected on Roland Baxter's confession. His admission, wrung from desperation in the anteroom's quiet tension, had unravelled the case. But Miss Marple, ever cautious, knew that even a confession required scrutiny, to ensure no threads remained loose. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen truths half told, like a village gossip's tale that hid a deeper secret, and she meant to see this matter through to its end. Inspector Craddock joined her, his face weary but relieved, a man who had seen justice take shape. He carried a file of reports, the fruits of the forensic team's work, and settled beside her, his notebook open to a fresh page. "Baxter's in custody," he said, his voice low. "His handwriting matches the blueprint's annotations, and the wire cutter from Ridley's room had traces of the same insulation used in the stage's wiring. It's solid, Miss Marple." He tampered with the circuit just as he said to sabotage the Aurora's display. The surge killed Langston, whether he meant it or not. Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing as she met his gaze. "A sad business, Inspector. Envy is a cruel master, as I've seen before. In my village, a young man once ruined a rival's garden out of spite, not thinking it would lead to ruin. Mr. Baxter's ambition blinded him, and now he pays the price." She thought of Roland's crumpled figure, his charm shattered, and felt a pang of pity, tempered by the certainty of justice. Craddock flipped through his file, his brow furrowing. We've checked his alibi. Hargrove and Ellison confirmed he slipped away for nearly an hour that night, just as the guard said. No one else was seen near the workshop, and the fingerprints on the blueprint, though smudged, match Baxter's. It's airtight, but I can't shake the feeling we've missed something. Ridley's nerves, St. Clair's quickness to blame him. There's still a shadow here. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, her mind as sharp as ever. You're wise to be thorough, Inspector. People are complex like a piece of lace. Beautiful, but full of holes if you look closely. Let us consider the others. She resumed her knitting, the clicks a steady rhythm, as she sifted through the case's final threads. Clara Henshaw, she reflected, had been cleared by the blueprint's handwriting, her precise script a stark contrast to Roland's jagged scrawl. Her resentment of Victor's demands was real, but her pride in the Aurora's design argued against sabotage. Miss Marple recalled Clara's glance at Roland during the trap in the organizer's office, a flicker of suspicion that now seemed prescient. Miss Henshaw is innocent, she said softly, but she knew more than she said. Her wariness of Mr. Baxter was telling. She must have suspected he'd tamper with her work. Craddock nodded, jotting a note. She's been cooperative since we showed her the blueprint. Said she noticed some tools out of place at night, but thought it was carelessness. She's shaken, but relieved it wasn't her error. Evelyn Street Clare's ambition, too, had been a potent force, her control over the show a shield for her fears of scandal. Her quickness to point at Tom Ridley suggested a desire to deflect, but her backstage presence, confirmed by multiple witnesses, placed her away from the workshop during Roland's intrusion. Miss Marple thought of her nervous bracelet twisting, a mirror to a St. Mary Mead widow's anxious brooch fiddling when her reputation was at stake. Miss St. Clair wanted her show to succeed, Miss Marple said, and Victor's death threatened that. But she's no murderer. Her empire is safe now, though I dare say she's learned a lesson in humility. Craddock's lips twitched, a faint smile. She's already planning next year's show, though she's promised tighter security. Said she'll never let a Langston steal her thunder again. Tom Ridley, the nervous technician, remained the final piece. His fear, his argument over unpaid overtime, had made him a convenient scapegoat, but the wire cutter's evidence pointed firmly to Roland. Miss Marple recalled Tom's trembling hands, his insistence that he followed Victor's orders, and wondered if those orders had been a fabrication, passed through a third party to ensure Tom's compliance. Yet no evidence linked another hand to the crime, and Tom's relief at Roland's arrest, reported by a constable, suggested a man freed from suspicion's weight. Young Tom was used, Miss Marple said, like a lad in my village who carried a message he didn't understand. He'll be more careful now, I think. Craddock closed his file, his expression easing. You've tied it up neatly, Miss Marple. Baxter's confession, the blueprint, the wire cutter, it's all there. The coroner's report confirms electrocution caused by the overloaded circuit. We've got our man. Miss Marple's needles stilled, her eyes soft but certain. Indeed, Inspector. But it's a reminder, isn't it, how fragile people are. Pride, envy, ambition, they lead to such tangles. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a woman ruin a rival's quilt out of jealousy, not thinking it would unravel her own life. Mr. Baxter thought to dim a light, and instead he extinguished one. She rose, tucking her knitting away, her mind already turning to the quiet of her village. The hall buzzed around her, the aurora standing silent under its shroud, a monument to Victor's brilliance and folly. Clara would rebuild her reputation, Evelyn her show, and Tom his confidence, but Roland's envy had cost him everything. Miss Marple felt the familiar satisfaction of a puzzle solved, though tempered by the sadness of human frailty. As she stepped toward the exit, Craddock called after her. "Will you stay for the show's closing, Miss Marple? Or is Saint Mary Mead calling you back?" She smiled, her shawl adjusted with care. "I think I've seen enough of motors, Inspector. My garden needs tending, and my neighbours will have their own little dramas to share. But do keep me posted. I'm always curious." With a nod she left the hall, the truth a completed pattern in her mind, its threads woven tight. Chapter 12. The Quiet Departure. The St. Mary's Motor Show drew to its close under a sky heavy with late summer clouds. The exhibition hall's gleam softened by the sombre resolution of Victor Langston's murder. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly pinned and her knitting bag tucked under her arm, stood at the edge of the hall, her eyes lingering on the aurora, now unveiled once more, but stripped of its former triumph. Roland Baxter's confession had unravelled the tangled threads of envy and ambition, and the show, though salvaged, would carry the scar of its tragedy. Miss Marple felt the familiar calm of a case resolved, yet her heart, seasoned by the dramas of St. Mary Mead, held a quiet sadness for the human frailties laid bare. She was ready to return to her village, where the rhythms of life were simpler, if no less revealing. The platform at St. Mary's Station was bustling with travellers, their voices a hum of farewells and hurried plans. Miss Marple, her small suitcase at her feet, sat on a bench, her knitting needles moving with their steady rhythm, as she waited for the train to London, where she would connect to St. Mary Mead. The station's air was cool, tinged with the scent of coal and rain, and she found comfort in its familiarity, so like the little platform near her village. Her mind, however, was still with the motor show, its players etched in her memory like characters in a well-read novel. Inspector Craddock had seen her off at the hall, his face lighter now that Roland was in custody, the case closed with a clarity that satisfied even his meticulous standards. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he had said, tipping his hat. "I'd have missed that blueprint without you. We'll have you on the force yet." His smile had been warm, and she had chuckled, deflecting the praise with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense, Inspector," she had replied. "I only notice what's there to be seen. People are the same everywhere, you know. Village or city, they carry their hearts on their sleeves, if you know where to look." She had left him with a promise to write, though she suspected he would be too busy with his next case to visit her quiet corner of the world. Now, as the train's whistle sounded in the distance, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the suspects, each freed from suspicion but marked by the ordeal. Clara Henshaw, her pride restored, would continue her work, perhaps with a newfound caution about those she trusted. Miss Marple recalled Clara's steady hands, her guarded eyes, and saw in her a resilience that would carry her forward, much like Mrs. Eldridge, the St. Mary Mead seamstress who had rebuilt her reputation after a scandal. Evelyn Street Clare, her ambition chastened but unbowed, would plan her next show with fiercer determination, her bracelet twisting a reminder of lessons learned. Tom Ridley, the nervous technician, had emerged from his fear with a resolve to be more vigilant, like a St. Mary Mead lad who had learned from a youthful mistake. Roland Baxter, however, was the tragedy's centre, his envy a flame that had consumed his future. Miss Marple thought of his crumpled confession, his charm reduced to ash, and saw in him a mirror to a village grocer whose jealousy had led to ruin. "He wanted to dim a star," she murmured, her needles pausing, "and lost his own light in the process." The blueprint, the wire cutter, the guard's testimony, all had pointed to him, and his admission had sealed his fate. Yet Miss Marple, with her gentle heart, felt no triumph, only a quiet sorrow for a man undone by his own weakness. The train pulled into the station, its steam curling into the air, and Miss Marple rose, her suitcase light, but her thoughts heavy with reflection. The newspapers scattered on a nearby bench screamed headlines of Roland's arrest, the Aurora's fall, and the show's tarnished glory. She ignored them, preferring the truth she had pieced together, stitch by stitch, like the lace in her knitting bag. Human nature, she knew, was a pattern as old as time. Pride, envy, ambition, fear, woven into every heart, whether in a grand hall or a village green. As she boarded the train, a porter assisting with her case, Miss Marple glanced back at the station, its bustle a faint echo of the motor show's chaos. She thought of Victor Langston, whose brilliance had invited his doom, and of Roland, whose desperation had cost him everything. "It's always the same story," she said softly, settling into her seat, her needles resuming their rhythm. "People want too much, or fear too little, and it leads them astray." The train rolled forward, carrying her toward the familiar comforts of St. Mary Mead, where her garden awaited, and her neighbours would greet her with tales of their own small dramas. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes bright with the quiet joy of home. The motor show, with its gleaming machines and hidden motives, was behind her, but its lessons would linger, like the faint scent of coal smoke in the air. She opened her knitting bag, her fingers finding the wool, and as the countryside unfolded beyond the window, she began a new row, each stitch a testament to the enduring puzzle of the human heart.